All right, another Q&A, and God, I guess I'm gonna have to get like a proper light if I'm gonna be a high quality YouTuber, although I'm never gonna fucking do this in 4K because y'all all watch this shit on your phones. Why does it matter? Anyway, uh, today's Q&A is, you've said that you think powerlifters often grow better than bodybuilders. Why do you think this is true? So as a quick caveat, let me make it clear that I'm talking about natural athletes, right? As I talked about in last week's piece, who are the real bro scientists? Once you introduce enough steroids into the picture, a lot of what I'm going to talk about doesn't matter, right? Like clearly drug-fueled bodybuilders are bigger than most powerlifters. If you go back and look at like guys like Dave Tate and Jim Wendler, when they dieted down, they were probably as big and certainly denser than a lot of bodybuilders. But that the drugs just color the issue too much. That I want to focus on comparing natural powerlifters and natural bodybuilders, um, and why, as I've said for years, I think that the powerlifters often do grow better than the average bodybuilder or person seeking hypertrophy. Now, one thing I want to bring up, there's a common misconception and a very commonly dumb statement that's made, right? People will look at powerlifters who often have huge backs and go, see, deadlifting gives you a big back. And that's not true. With a brief exception, during the late 2000s when the Corte 3x3 came to popularity and all anyone did was the competition lifts, powerlifters do hypertrophy work, right? It's not like they only deadlift and that's what gives them a big back. Most, if they're any good, do a tremendous amount of back work. Rows, pull downs of varying sorts. Same reason they do direct chest work, shoulder work, tricep work, leg presses, hack squats for lower body. They are not just doing the power lift. I train an elite female power lifter, and she actually does very low volumes of competition work because she's got utterly shitty levers for it. And she does a lot of assistance work to build weak points for triples, and then she just does a ton of bodybuilding. So you can see her back, and she does, depending on the phase of training, anywhere between 12 to 16 sets of total back work. She does rows, sets of 8 twice a week, and then pull down sets of 8 once a week, and then a lot of low back work, which is why your spinal erectors are so damn thick work. And I've always trained people like this, by which I mean relatively low repetition work in the competition lifts, some sort of specific assistance work, and then just a shed load of bodybuilding work, which is usually sets of 6 to 8, occasionally up to 12, depending on what we're doing. So powerlifters almost always do bodybuilding work, by which I mean higher volume, hypertrophy, more isolation type stuff. You know what we consider the traditional bodybuilding work. Because the power lifts, especially deadlifts, frequently don't lend themselves to the higher repetitions and higher volumes that you can much more easily do with a lot less stress. I mean, do you intend to do like 15 to 16 sets of high rep deadlifts per week when I just have my lifter do fucking cable rows and pull downs to accomplish the exact same thing? I mean, you could do 26 sets of quad work, including 9 sets of squats, ha ha ha, for high reps. Or you could work triples and fives for your squat and then do fucking leg presses and leg extensions and show a brain. And that's what most powerlifters do. So with that in mind, right? And of course, there's also power building or power bodybuilding, which is sort of a hybrid where bodybuilders often do somewhat more powerlifting training, and that they may do heavy fives in, the big compounds. And video coming up soon, fuck the big five, just wait. I've been waiting to do this one for years. But they'll do that for heavier sets of fives, and then they'll, do their bodybuilding work. And even if you look at, my generic bulking routine written over 20 years ago, that's still just as valid now and is really what most of these people are cranking out now because, as always, I've been right for over 2 decades. Even if people won't give me credit for it, but they know I am. Used heavier sets of 6 to 8 for, compound movements, and then higher sets of 10 to 12. But whatever. Let's get back to traditional bodybuilding training. Sets of 8 to 12, 10 to 12, 10 to 15, compared to powerlifting training, where you're typically going to be doing, low-ish reps on the power lifts, some sort of assistance work, and then, more traditional bodybuilding work. Why do I think natural powerlifters grow better than the average person seeking hypertrophy, seeking bodybuilding results in the gym? And it comes down to three simple words: progressive tension overload. Because as much as people want to prattle about volume and this and the other being the primary driver on hypertrophy, it's all wrong. Progressive tension overload, by which I mean adding weight to the bar over time, is and will always be the singular, most important primary factor in growth. We've known this since the work of Goldspink in the late 70s, early 80s. And if you actually bother to read the volume studies and the frequency studies and then this study and then that study, with like three exceptions I can think of, they all mention in the paper that weight is added to the bar to maintain the proper repetition range and intensity. So if they're using a repetition range, either during the workout or whatever, and the person gets too many reps above the high goal repetition range, that they add weight at the next workout. It's a fairly standard double progression in most cases, but that is inherent to the research. All of them except like three. That is assumed because progression is, if there's not progression, it's not fucking training. Even the dumb shit 52 set, the 26 sets twice a week thing, they still added weight over time to maintain the proper repetition range as the people got stronger. This is inherent to every study because without progression, it is not training, which means that everything else, every other variable, the volume, the exercise selection, the frequencies, the rep range, is all being studied on the base of progressive tension overload, which means that by definition, they are secondary. It is being tested on a base of assumed progressive tension overload because fucking lab coats, I don't mean the bro scientist lab coats, the fitness evidence-based gurus, I mean real researchers, they know more than the average fitness professional dipshit. And that's the difference. Bodybuilding training, because of the drug issue, because of the stupidity, has been infested with this idea of, oh, weight on the bar doesn't matter and just do volume or the squeeze or the pump or lengthen partials like little Milo is now saying is the only thing you should do, and I'll do a video on his dumb shit soon enough. Doctor, fuck you. If you have to mention your PhD and bring it up, it's because you can't prove to people you're smart without it. But bodybuilding is infested with this shit. Go into any gym and you will see people using the same weights now that they were a year ago. Just gotta do more volume, bro. Gotta do more bicep work, bro. The pump, the squeeze, all that dumb shit. And don't mishear me. I'm not saying that learning how to utilize the target muscle is a bad thing. The pump doesn't mean shit. But I'm not saying that like just heave the weight around, or that squeeze or internal focus or any of that is not relevant. What I'm saying is that if that's all they're doing in lieu of adding weight to the bar, they're not making any progress. There's no progressive tension overload if you're not adding weight to the bar, and as Dante Trudell said, in a moderate repetition range, over time, and I don't mean every workout, I don't mean every fucking week, I don't mean the dumb moronic shit like Mike Israel, you gotta add something every week. That's not what progressive overload is, you fucking cretins. Progressive tension overload occurs over time. My elite powerlifter doesn't add weight to the bar more than every 2 or 3 weeks. She's only added 2.5 kilos to all of her competition. It's taken me 13 weeks at this point in her career. And she deadlifts over triple body weight, which is stronger than most of y'all listening to this. My point being, progressive tension overload occurs over long periods of time. For beginners, it may be rapidly, quickly. At the intermediate level, you may only be adding weight every 4 weeks to the bar. The advanced level, like I said, with my elite powerlifter, it takes me 13 weeks to get her a small PR at this point. Progressive tension overload is not every workout or every week. It is when you are ready for it. Progressive adding weight to the bar. But if it is not present, you are not growing, period. If you are benching 185 by 8 now, and you are benching 185 by 8 a year from now, you are no bigger. Period. And that's the difference. Too much bodybuilding training is infested by all this secondary, tertiary, quaternary bullshit. All big natural bodybuilders are very strong. Now, they may not be elite lifter strong, but if they've gone from 135 by 8 when they started to 315 or 365 by 8 years later, their legs are bigger. It has to be. Many cross-compete in powerlifting, and that should tell you something. And I want to emphasize moderate repetition range, because people always mishear me and use a bunch of strawman arguments when I say this. I'm not saying the guy with the biggest 1RM will be the biggest, although there's some general truth to that. I'm not saying that improving your low repetition strength will automatically make you bigger. As Dante Trudel summed up hypertrophy training, growth occurs by getting stronger in a moderate repetition range. And many bodybuilders, misled by the endless bullshit, don't do that. But in powerlifting, progressive overload is built into the fucking sport. Psychologically, the goal of powerlifting and the mental state of powerlifters is to grow stronger over time by adding weight to the bar. And they don't just do this on the competition lifts if they're smart. They are adding weight to the bar on their hypertrophy work as they get stronger, because progressive tension overload is built into the nature of the sport and the psychology of the lifters. So when they do their bodybuilding training after their competition and assistance work, over time they add weight because it's built into the sport and built into their mindset. Whereas the typical individual seeking hypertrophy in the typical commercial gym, who has been misled by the utter bullshit of the fitness industry, promoted by the utter dipshits in the fitness industry, don't. There's one more thing I want to talk about. Since people tend to misrepresent and mishear me, let me make it clear. I'm not saying that you should all be doing powerlifting training to get bigger. I'm making a point about progressive tension overload. But I think there's another point that does feed into this. And this is actually a bigger issue of the difference why bodybuilding is so infested by horseshit and powerlifting by and large isn't. And that's because of the nature of the sports. In powerlifting, your training either made you stronger or it didn't. It either allowed you to put more weight on the bar in the competition lifts or it didn't. It either allowed you to lift more at meet or it didn't. You can very easily judge whether or not the training is working. And in bodybuilding and in hypertrophy training, that's frequently just not the case. And I'd say this is even true when you look at drug-fueled powerlifting, where the information just isn't as fucking dumb as in bodybuilding. Because even if you're taking all the drugs in the world, in powerlifting, you still have to do the fucking work. You still have to train in such a way to put more weight on the bar. The drugs won't make it happen without the work. And in bodybuilding, the drugs will make you bigger no matter what work you do. So powerlifting simply can't be infested with the same ignorant shit as bodybuilding. Drugs are not. Because in powerlifting, you either got stronger or you didn't, and the drugs can't do that for you. But in bodybuilding, with drugs involved, you can get bigger just by escalating your doses. Even ignoring the issue, going back to naturals, when you're talking about hypertrophy training, the gains are so crushingly slow and so hard to even measure, right? If you're a natural and you're gaining, let's say, a pound a month, half a kilo, which is doing really well, all over the body, you can't measure that with a tape measure. It's not even visually apparent by the time you add body fat and water and body dysmorphia, the fact that your eyes are lying to you. It's really, really hard to know if the hypertrophy training is working. Whereas in powerlifting, if you don't feel like you're getting stronger or better every 3 or 4 weeks, you know the training is fucked and you have to change it because it's an objective outcome that is measurable. You're either moving more weight or moving the same weight faster, the same weight more technically competently than you were before. And in bodybuilding, who the fuck knows? So it's very easy to just spend months cranking along with the same dumb shit bodybuilding training or hypertrophy training without having any fucking clue if it's working. And that just doesn't happen in powerlifting. You either got stronger or you didn't. In bodybuilding, maybe I'm bigger, Maybe I look a little bit better. Maybe I don't. It's hard to tell. So there you go. I think the big difference is the big reason that the average powerlifter, natural, grows better than the average person seeking hypertrophy is that progressive tension overload is built into the sport, and the results of the training are objective. You either got stronger or you didn't, the training worked or it didn't, and in bodybuilding, it's too vague, especially when you're doing bullshit training promoted by dipshits in the fitness industry. See you next time. So there you go. For the record, I do not read or answer or respond to comments either on YouTube or Instagram, nor do I delete them like all the other cowards in the industry if I don't like them. I simply can't be bothered. If you have a question you'd like me to maybe consider answering, send it to me at questions@bodyrecomposition.com, and I might get to it, or I might not. There's just no way to tell with me. It's part of my charm. See you next time.